Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now in today's one we are comparing 2014's high-end GTX 980 to 2016's high-end GTX 1080. One has 4GB of VRAM, the other 8. In my opinion both are decent choices at their respective price points, though the 1080 comes in at around double the cost on the used market here in the UK. While prices may vary depending on where you are in the world, I thought it would be interesting to see if we get what we pay for. What sort of performance increases can we expect if we spend the extra on the newer 8GB card. Now both of these cards are still supported in 2023, with the latest driver at the time of this video being version 546.29. I'm not sure how long support will last, but one thing is for sure, the 1080 will likely receive updates for longer. I've made assumptions in the past that have unfortunately come true very soon afterwards, so I hope I just haven't cursed the 980's longevity. I'm a fan of both GPUs to be honest, and while I'd most certainly recommend the 1080 if you have the money, I'd like to reiterate the point that both are solid options for the money you can expect to pay. So let's get into some comparisons. First of all, we have Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p with the medium preset. The GTX 980 hit 41 FPS on average with a 1% low of 37 and a 0.1% low of 35, so a nice consistent experience here. The GTX 1080 was 74% faster when looking at the average FPS alone, hitting 71 FPS. The 1% low was 62 and the 0.1% low was 57. I've included this average FPS increase percentage on every result today. This is not taking into consideration the percentile lows, just that average figure, but hopefully it's helpful nonetheless. Next up we have Red Dead Redemption 2 at 1080p with the ultra textures and all else set to medium with TAA. The GTX 980 hit a very respectable 58 FPS with a 1% low of 49 and a 0.1% low of 48, so again very consistent. I am using an i9 to be honest, so we're seeing improved consistency with these frame time numbers. It's the 14900K. This I received from Asus a while ago. You wouldn't pair either of these cards with a CPU like this, but it does mean that we're getting the absolute most out of these GPUs, so no performance is left on the table. With the GTX 1080, well, this was a very nice 69% faster when taking into consideration the average FPS alone, of course, with 98. The 1% low was 79 and the 0.1% low was 77, so another consistent experience. Starfield is of course troublesome, but I like to keep it in the benchmarks basically for this reason, and the reason is that it's not only problematic on some hardware, but it's quite intensive on certain systems as well. These two graphics cards here are no exception. The 980 couldn't really deliver a playable result here with the medium preset, averaging just 27 FPS with a 1% low of 20 and a 0.1% low of 19. The 1080, well, it was 66% faster on average with 45 FPS, but we did still see a few dips and drops here and there as represented by those percentile figures. Still, we remained at over 30 frames per second pretty much all of the time, so this was a welcome improvement of course. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt next with the next gen patch applied. Here we're using the high preset and TAAU. The GTX 980 delivered once again a respectable result and a very nice result of 69 FPS on average with a 1% low of 57 and a 0.1% low of 53. The GTX 1080 was 77% faster on average with 122 FPS with a 1% low of 73 and a 0.1% low of 53. So that percentile low was actually the same with both cards, but sort of irrelevant really in the grand scheme of things. Assassin's Creed Mirage is a new one that I've added to the benchmarks. I've still yet to actually start the game. I've just been running the in-game benchmark test for the footage and for the results, of course. Here with the medium preset and TAA, the 980 hit 53 frames per second. Now in the real world, I'd recommend implementing some sort of upscaling technique or dynamic resolution scaling, depending on which games have which options, of course. But in these comparison tests, I like to run things at native resolution resolution because I think it makes things a lot more fairer. But here 53 FPS was pretty good, the 1% low was 33 and the 0.1% low was 20. The 1080 was 62% faster with 86 FPS on average, a 1% low of 53 and a 0.1% low of 33. Remember that that average calculation does not take into consideration the percentile lows, just the average figure. Finally then, we have Fortnite at 1080p with the high preset. Proves somewhat challenging on a lot of cards when we turn the settings right up, but here on the 980 we were able to hit at least 60 FPS, 70 on average in fact, with a few drops below 60 here and there. Although the 1080 was 76% faster based on that average FPS alone, there were still a few dips and drops, as you can see by that 0.1% low, which wasn't that much better than the 980s. In fact, that goes for the 1% figure too. Now, when we put all of this together, on average, the GTX 1080 was 71% faster overall based on the average FPS, just using these 6 games tested today. So performance is likely to vary on a game-by-game basis. With the GTX 980 selling for an average price of £61 here in the UK based on the last 5 listings, and the GTX 1080 selling for an average used price of £125 based on the last 5 listings on eBay, that makes it 105% more expensive than the 980 in 2023 based on the last 5 listings. But for that 105% price difference, we get an improved performance on average of 71%. So make of that information what you will, but we're not getting 105% more performance, at least not from this selection of games, that's for sure. Still, this will vary depending on where you live, and of course the prices will change things as well, so I just thought I'd throw these numbers in for some context, even if they aren't really all that helpful if you live outside of the UK, but there we go. As I said at the start, I think both of these cards are solid at their respective price point. I mean, 60 odd pounds for a GTX 980 4GB really isn't bad in 2023, considering it can still play the latest games, most of them anyway. If you want to play Starfield, forget about it, but if you have a bit more to spend, then of course the GTX 1080 will be a much nicer option. It has 8 gigs of RAM, sort of what most will call the sort of base point I think for 2023. Very handy to have that extra VRAM. You do of course pay for it and the extra performance. £125 on average I think is still okay, to be honest, considering the performance you're getting and considering that the card is still supported. We can't make use of DLSS or hardware-based ray tracing, of course, but that doesn't matter too much because we can use FSR in games that support it, and a lot of games do support it. That's going to be helpful for the 980, of course, too. All that's left to say is I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you found it helpful. If you did, leave a like down below, leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know if you use either of these 2 cards down below in the comments, of course. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already and you want to, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.